All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective and most tardy libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time, sort of, but not really early. All right, folks. Oh, my goodness. Last week I was sick, and you may not have known that because I was kind of intermittently streaming. And the streaming that I did was primarily with guests. I had a couple candidates that I was able to score and bring on the show and discuss their run for office. So go check those out. And the reason I did those is because I don't have to do as much talking. And I was very concerned that I would not be able to do a full show without like coughing and gagging or, have to hit the mute button multiple times or whatever. So I just was like, we'll do some shows with people. I can ask them a question, take a sip of water. They can answer. I can kind of quietly clear my throat. I can mute the mic if I need to while they're talking. Like it was very advantageous. So that's what I did. That's why I wasn't out, or that's why I wasn't in, last week. So bear with me. This week, well, it seems like every time that I take some time off, I struggle to get back in. What's going on here? Where's DL's hat? That Liberty lady would like to know. I'll get to that. So it seems like every time I'm gone for a few weeks or a few days or whatever, I come back and I struggle. And it's almost like, do I know how to podcast? Kind of, but sort of, and maybe not really. Anyway, to the question of where's my hat, and it took me a second because I was looking at the icon and I wasn't quite sure what it was. I'm getting old. But anyway, where is my hat? My friend was over on Friday night, and I think we went out for a walk. He had a cigar. I did not because again I was sick. And then we came back in, and I set my hat on the chair. And then he put his jacket over it. And then when he left, he kind of grabbed it, and it got caught up in his jacket. And then he didn't realize it till he got home. So that's where my hat is, my little signature hat that I have. And so we're just all discombobulated today, but that's okay. We're going to go through this save act, and I'm going to oppose it. I know. Like, what? DL, everybody supports this. Why not you? Everybody meaning like a lot of people support it. And we're going to get into that. So let's talk about it. Proponents, their big issue with it is that it will ensure that only U.S. citizens vote in federal elections. It'll prevent non-citizens from voting, and it'll resolve at least some level of election fraud. They also believe that it's going to restore public trust and confidence in election integrity. And I'm not really sure about that, but that's the claim. Like that's the intent, is that hey, we put this law into place, and Americans will magically be like, wow, our elections are secure and they're illegal people aren't voting. Okay, we'll find out about that. Another argument that they make is that it's just common sense, right? There's broad public support, somewhere between 80% or even more for citizen-only voting, which I largely agree with that. I think that only citizens should vote. Then on the other hand, you have opponents. They say, well, this is unnecessary. Non-citizen voting is pretty rare and already illegal and prohibited. They also claim that it'll disenfranchise millions of eligible voters, some naming up to like 20 some million voters who will be disenfranchised. They also claim that it creates a barrier by ending online mail-in registration, voter drives, and shifting the verification burden from the government to voters, which would harm the election access to people overall. In my opinion, this really appears to be an issue between preventing non-citizen voting versus increasing the burden to citizens. That's basically the core of any argument to be had on this. Now, on one hand, you've got Democratic alarmists who present the issue as if citizens cannot get proper ID at all, while Republicans will scoff and they'll argue back that people have ID for a myriad of other daily activities. And it's true. I'm 47. If I go to buy alcohol or cigarettes, I will, well, I will often be asked for my ID. I think I'm starting to look old enough that they just kind of let it slide. But sometimes I am asked for an ID. And if I am asked for it, I have to have it or I cannot make that purchase. The truth appears to be somewhere in the middle. So before we can really kind of hammer out why I'm opposing this particular bill, let's at least talk about what are some of the things that it does. In specific, what does it do in terms of requiring ID for citizens? So I'm going to kind of read a little bit of a summary to you from Section 2 of the bill, which is titled Ensuring Only Citizens Are Registered to Vote in Elections for Federal Office. And it lists these as acceptable forms of ID. So you can have a form of identification issued consistent with the requirements of the Real ID Act of 2005. That indicates the applicant is a citizen of the United States. Now, the problem with that is that while a Real ID has been implemented for a long time, many states have it. Florida, for example, if you have a driver's license in Florida that's relatively recent, or actually probably any of them, it is Real ID compliant. However, it would not be SAVE Act compliant. And the reason for that is because I didn't have to verify my citizenship to get my ID. Remember, that's been a big complaint from people. They're like, oh, people in California get driver's licenses, and then they come over here and they're, in Florida or wherever, and they're driving these massive semi-trailers, and sometimes they wreck and they kill people. We had that incident a while back, right? I think there was actually 2 of them. So we know for a fact that even if a driver's license is Real ID compliant, it's not necessarily going to be SAVE Act compliant, which raises the bar a little bit. Another form of ID, he's missing graphics as well, I think. Graphics. What do you mean? I'm looking at the show notes, folks. Missing graphics. Yes, the hat is missing, and then the graphics, I don't know what you're talking about there, but you'll have to let me know. So another form of ID would be a passport. Okay, so you could have a Real ID, or that has been that does show that yes, your citizenship has been verified. So it's a specific type of Real ID, not just any Real ID. You can also have a U.S. passport. You can also have military ID. You can also have a valid government issued photo ID issued by federal, state, or tribal government that shows the applicant's place of birth was in the United States. So if you have some other form that actually says, yes, you've been verified as a citizen of this country. You can also have a valid government issue photo ID, just a regular one, that's issued by, again, federal, state, or tribal government, as long as you have additional documents. So if that particular ID is not Real ID and SAVE Act compliant, in other words, it was not given to you on the basis of verified citizenship, and it doesn't list it on there, like citizenship hasn't been verified and listed on the ID, then you can have an official government issued ID as long as you have one of these documents: birth certificate, an extract from a United States hospital record of birth. You can have a final adoption decree. You can have a consular report of birth abroad, a naturalization certificate, or an American Indian card, right? So you can have multiple. So you can have just a regular ID and then show up with one of these other documents. Now, on the surface, that does sound reasonable, but is there any burden? Let's see. I'm looking at the. Oh, yeah. How about there's that? Thought there was a logo and or ticket stream. Oh, there we go. I don't know about the ticket stream there, Joe. Sorry, interruption here, folks. Just checking out the chat real quick. Yes, I didn't have my logo up here where my hand is. Now we have that. Yeah. If you were here at the beginning of the show, you know that I am just all out of it right now. just all over the place. Anyway, so on the surface, these requirements, they do sound relatively reasonable, right? ID is a common thing in the United States. But is there any burden? Well, according to Chuck Schumer, this is practically this is practically Jim Crow 2.0. Let's hear him.
About 83% of the American people, including majority Democrats, support voter ID laws.
Well, yeah, the voter ID laws that, first, each state can have its own voter ID laws, and some do and some don't. But secondly, what they are proposing in this so-called SAVE Act is like Jim Crow 2.0. They make it so hard to get any kind of voter ID that more than 20 million legitimate people, mainly poorer people and people of color, will not be able to vote under this law. We will not let it pass in the Senate. We are fighting it tooth and nail. It's an outrageous proposal that is, that shows the sort of political bias of the MAGA right. They don't want poor people to vote. They don't want people of color to vote because they often don't vote for them.
Well, that's quite the claim. But then on the other side of the aisle, according to Ari Fleischer, it's really no big deal, even for poor people. Here's what he had to say.
Democrats oppose it because they say it's suppression of votes, Jim Crow 2.0, because poor people can't afford to go out and get an ID. They don't have IDs. Well, in order to qualify for Medicaid, in order to qualify for food stamps, you have to have an ID. You have to prove you're a citizen. And so I don't get the Democrat point. If you're too poor to get an ID, then why would you qualify for food stamps? Isn't that for the poor? So there's no logic to the Democrat position other than they're working so hard to let anybody vote without knowing if they're a citizen or not. And if you have voted successfully, it's the perfect crime. No one will catch you. You voted, you got away with it, and then nobody goes back and looks at the rolls and cross indexes to see who's a citizen. So I don't understand the Democratic opposition.
Okay. So on one side, it's Jim Crow 2.0. Oh my goodness, we're disenfranchising people. We don't want the poor people to vote. And then on the other side, it's like, well, you guys just want anybody to vote, even illegal immigrants. It's just craziness. It's madness. But I will say this. I saw this video and I thought this was interesting because even CNN, they acknowledge that there's strong support for voter IDs.
Voter ID is not controversial in this country. A photo ID to vote is not controversial in this country. It is not controversial by party, and it is not controversial by race. The vast majority of Americans agree with Nicki Minaj that, in fact, you should have a photo ID to be able to vote.
Okay. I did not have on my adult bingo card one day CNN or any mainstream media saying Americans agree with this singer on this legislation. That's just wild, but whatever. I don't care. I just think that's funny. So who is right? Okay. Because it is true that, again, IDs are ubiquitous in our country. But again, there appears to be this conflict, like I said, between preventing the non-citizen voting versus increasing the burden to citizens. And I think what we have to determine is which issue is worse. So let me pull something up. Let's see here. Where do we go? There's the quotes here. There we go. So according to a 2007 report from the Government Accountability Office, they said, and let me make this a little bit bigger for my old eyes. They states reported that the citizenship documentation requirement resulted in barriers to access to Medicaid for some eligible citizens. 22 of the 44 states reported declines in Medicaid enrollment due to the requirement, and a majority of these states attributed to the declines to delay. Boy, today is just terrible. And a majority of these states attributed the declines to delays in or losses of Medicaid coverage for individuals who appeared to be U.S. citizens. It goes on to state that not all of the 22 states reporting declines could quantify enrollment declines due specifically to the requirement, but a state that had begun tracking the effect identified 18,000 individuals in the 7 months after implementation whose applications were denied or coverage was terminated for inability to provide the necessary documentation, though the state believed most of them to be eligible citizens. I want you to think about that for just a second. We had 18,000 people in one state that were denied coverage, that the state basically said, we're pretty sure they're Americans, but because we have to go through this new process, these people are going to be denied coverage. So it sounds to me like the idea that shifting from where we are right now, which is basically honor roll system, it's, you're perjuring yourself if you say I'm an American citizen, but you're not. Okay. We're going from an honor roll system to an explicitly, you have to prove that you're an American citizen system. Going from one to the other based on when we've done something similar for Medicaid, which Ari Fleischer pointed out wasn't a problem, which was, according to the government, going from one to the other based on past history shows that, yes, there could very well be people that will be denied their right to vote. So I think the conversation that is being had, which is you don't want people to vote versus you want everybody to vote, I believe that conversation is the wrong one to be having. I also think it's inaccurate to say, well, millions of people will be disenfranchised. Maybe, but not necessarily, because we have to ask ourselves, how many people have these documents on hand? If they have them on hand, they can go to their fire safe and they can pull out their passport or their birth certificate. Then it's just a matter of a trip right down to the county clerk's office, right? Pretty simple. But if you don't have it for whatever reason and you have to go and get it, well, that's going to require time. Now, the problem with the time is, when do you realize you don't have it? That's the big problem. If you realize you don't have it, let's say a week before voting time, before it's time to vote, well, then you probably aren't going to have enough time to resolve it, because you're going to have to reach out to whatever institution to get whatever document that you need. And that information has to be processed, has to be sent to you, and then you have to go and register. Okay. Now, the catch here, this is where it gets tricky. The SAVE Act only refers to people when they're getting a new registration or updating. So for millions of people who already can vote, it's not an issue. Okay. So perhaps we're not quite Jim Crow 2.0, which was explicitly designed to disenfranchise blacks, by the way. So it's not Jim Crow in the sense that Jim Crow was intended to disenfranchise blacks. This would be an unintended consequence if we're being, a little on the fair side. The SAVE Act indeed lays out reasonable requirements, and some argue that Congress's authority to specify requirements under Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1, which says, and we'll go back to that, we'll go to that real quick here. It says, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators. Okay? They're relying on the word manner. Manner is what people are saying allows Congress to say, here is the requirement for this particular ID. I'm not so convinced of that, to be honest with you. But then others, they'll point out that Article 1, Sections 2 and 3, and the 17th Amendment explicitly leave voter qualifications to the states. That's where I fall. I look and I say, I think that's because it doesn't say like explicitly like requirements for voting to be to the states. And I'd pull it up, but it's a lot longer text, and so I'm not going to put it up on the screen. But when I'm reading the Constitution, what I look for is explicit and unambiguous language. We often use the term enumerated on purpose, right? These are your enumerated rights. These are the enumerated powers. Well, I'm not seeing here in this text up on the screen that it's enumerated, that the federal government can say, these are the requirements for a citizen to be permitted to vote. It says times, okay, when, the place, the location. Hey, you can use a church, you can't use a church, whatever. And manner, which I would interpret to be procedure. What is the procedure around this? Right? Not necessarily. This is at the time of voting, the manner of voting, holding elections. It says nothing about what are the requirements upon citizens. It's not enumerated. So for me, I look and I say, even though you could read into it, I think that's the problem. You're reading into it. From a constitutional perspective, I just don't see an argument for the federal government to impose stricter requirements on federal voting than the states themselves have. And I want you to remember, the federal government is designed to represent people and the states through the House of Representatives and the Senate, respectively. I want you to think about that for a second. The federal government is designed to represent the people and the states. And we have a constitution that was designed to very clearly delegate power and authority and then balance everything out through checks and balances to make sure that no one entity had too much power. And we vested a lot in the states. So for me, I look at it, I say, based on what I'm seeing here, and then if you also go back to Article 1, Section 2, 3, and the 17th Amendment, I would say, arguably, this is a state's issue. This is the state's responsibility to determine who is a legitimate voter and who is not. But there's more reason to be skeptical of the SAVE Act. Voter fraud, voter fraud does not appear to be as rampant as some people claim. The Heritage Foundation, conservative think tank, has this nifty tool that allows us to look up incidents of fraudulent voting. Let me put that up on the screen for you guys, because I think you guys are going to find this interesting. This is kind of what helped me think about this and say, okay, is voter fraud really happening to a degree where the issue outweighs the potential cost on citizens? So let's put that up on the screen here. Oh, no, I want to go, whoops, no, I want to go, give me a second, where's my... Oh, where did I want? Oh, goodness. Give me just a second here. There we go. That's what I wanted. Had to find it first. Okay. So here we are. Election fraud map. This is just a terrible day for podcasting. I promise I will be back better tomorrow. But anyway, explore the data here, right? So you can enter in keywords. You can choose your states. I've got all states selected. And you can choose from, let's see, what's the earliest date? 1982 all the way through 2025. You have case types. So if you drop it down, you've got criminal conviction, civil penalty, diversion program, judicial finding, official finding, right? So they've kind of got this thorough. And then on the fraud subcategory, it's got alien, deceased voter, felon voter, minor voter, non-resident voter. So we can look through and we can see that according to Heritage, their website, which documents voter fraud, we have 1,620 total results. Now, this is total, mind you. Okay, so that means you've got where's the subcategory? You've got aliens, deceased voters, felon voters. So this is not just limited to illegal immigrants voting. This is anybody that voted that was not supposed to vote. So then we look down here, we can see we've got Jerry Foster is the first one that comes up here in Florida. Case type, criminal conviction. We click on read. We can see that it was 2025, criminal conviction, ineligible voting. Jerry Foster was charged in Orange County with false affirmation and voting as an unqualified elector, both third-degree felonies because he voted despite being a convicted felon. Foster was convicted of and served prison time for sexual battery of a child in 2009. However, he registered and voted in the 2020 general election. Foster pleaded guilty to both counts and was ordered to pay a total of $518 in fines. He was also sentenced to 1 day in jail per count, served concurrently with credit for time served, and placed on supervised probation for 6 months. So it gives us the details of Jerry Foster and what he did. And we could go through and we could look at case after case after case. But that's the interesting part, isn't it? We have cases here that have been convicted. What does that tell you? That tells you that we have laws already to address this sort of thing. If there is fraudulent voting, we have laws that deal with it. All we need to do is investigate where there are accusations of fraudulent voting. That's it. We see the site shows the status of these, including convictions. Now, the relevant question here is, let's just ignore a moment the constitutionality. Is what the SAVE Act accomplishes. What does the SAVE Act accomplish that existing laws cannot? Now, presumably the argument's going to be, well, it's going to make sure that voters are legitimate in the first place. Then we wouldn't have to have a database like this. We wouldn't have to go and investigate people that are voting fraudulently, right? That's kind of the argument. Well, here's the problem. The problem is that I want to see that these issues of fraud far exceed the potential that we have for disenfranchising voters or making it more difficult for them to vote. I'm not opposed to the idea in general, the idea of having strict ID laws in order to vote. I don't have an issue with that. I already have to show an ID to vote. It's just right now, everything is on, as long as I have a driver's license and, I haven't cheated through the system, it's basically honor roll system. Okay? So I don't have an issue with the idea that we might just tighten it up a little bit. But I have to balance these out. And I have to say, well, is the problem greater, the problem of fraudulent voting, greater than it is with the issues that we might incur once people actually have to go and dig up the documents and make sure that they're in compliance in order to vote? And I'm not seeing it. Here on this site, as we see, 1,620 results. It's presumably much higher than that, right? Presumably, some people didn't get caught. They got to vote anyway. But is it 18,000 people? That was the number from the Government of Accountability Office. They said 18,000 people were denied or delayed their Medicaid because of the stricter requirements. One state, 18,000 people. That's a lot. So in a sense, the Democrats, they're exaggerating. They're engaging in hyperbole for sure, but not entirely, it seems, based on the evidence, right? Because again, Medicaid in 2005, they increased the requirements, as Ari Fleischer pointed out, they increased the requirements such that you actually had to prove that you're a citizen. He was actually incorrect when it comes to like SNAP and other programs. You can actually apply and be accepted in like SNAP and some other programs without verifying citizenship. That too is also honor roll. Okay, so like it's just your honor. Did I say honor roll? I mean not honor roll. What's the term? I keep saying. I think I've said honor roll multiple times now. But it's on your honor. Right? It's an honor system. And you basically you'd be in trouble if you were found to have lied about it. Another thing to consider, since Republicans are largely pushing the SAVE Act, is if 2020 was stolen from Trump, and then Biden allegedly allowed in tens of millions of additional illegal immigrants during his presidency, between both voting years, that was 2020 and 2024, How did Trump win in 2024? A stolen election in 2020 would mean that a means was in place to steal the election. We've already got a system worked out, right? Like if you did it once, then you've got a system that apparently works, right? Presumably. And then if you've got Biden, who allowed tens of millions of illegal immigrants in, well, that would mean an increase in potentially illegal voters. But yet, Trump went on to win in 2024, not just in electoral votes, but also the popular vote. I'm not seeing a problem that requires new legislation. And I'm not convinced that it's even constitutional in the first place. It's not popular to say, but I don't support the SAVE Act. Not because I think anyone should be allowed to vote, but for three primary reasons. Number one, it's arguably not constitutional, but perhaps someone can make a strong case, though Trump talking about nationalizing the elections hurts that case before the conversation is even had. Remember, he keeps talking about, oh, we should nationalize it. And I think there were about 15 states for which he was really focusing in on. So when you're talking about nationalizing the elections and then you're like, oh, we've got the SAVE Act. I mean, the timing kind of makes me a little on the skeptical side. Reasonably so. We should be skeptical about any constitutional overreaches, which, by the way, have been so far and so many that I don't think we could count them anymore at this point. But anyway, the second reason is I think it's going to burden the American populace and possibly cause disenfranchisement because we've already seen it when we've implemented similar voting requirements elsewhere. I'm sorry, not voting, but similar ID requirements elsewhere, such as with Medicaid. Okay. And third, I do not see the evidence of voter fraud outweighing the burden on American citizens. That is, I'm not convinced that more fraudulent votes will occur than Americans who may be prevented from voting or have to spend their time and money to resolve documentation issues. So for me, I cannot support this based on the evidence. Again, not based on I want illegals to vote, not based on I don't believe that there's fraudulent votes, not based on I don't think that we should have to show ID. I don't think that we have worked this bill out sufficiently to say, number one, this is how we're going to combat this real problem that really does need to be addressed. And then number two, I don't see how that is going to, that problem outweighs the potential future problems. So there's where I stand, folks. I don't know how you see it. Perhaps a short episode. Where are we at on time here? 34 minutes. Well, that's a really short episode. You waited all this long, all this time. Let's see what you guys are saying in the comments, since I'm just bumbling and fumbling all over the place today. Let's see what we got here. Ticker stream. I'm not sure what that is. I don't have a scrolling banner on the bottom, but I thought about putting one up, so I will do that. Let's see here. I wish I can edit comments on here. See, this weekend, Addison. Oh yeah, this weekend is the LPF convention. People might ask, DL, are you going? The answer is no, I am not. Let's see here. Let's see. LPF looks like they're going to be live streaming. Oh no, I haven't heard anybody live streaming. I don't know. I'm reading. Oh yeah, this is interesting. Tubb for District 10 president. Tubb for Duval. So Pastor Tubb, who you may know, he's been on the show a couple of times, more than a couple of times, actually quite a few times. And he ran for city council several years back. He is running now again for District 10. So I'll be looking forward to supporting him and hopefully getting him on the show to ask him questions about his run for office. Let's see here. I mean, Trump winning does show we have issues in how we elect people for president, but I get what you're saying. You're right. Like, we have issues because we elect terrible people. That's an entirely separate matter. And I'm not denying that there is fraud. I'm not denying that at all. I think there is fraud. I'm just like, you've got fraud that's with just regular Americans, as we saw in that one particular case that I just randomly pulled up. And the guy just went and registered to vote, even though he was a convicted felon, and he voted, and then he got punished for it, right? Was that a Democratic conspiracy? Hard to say. Don't know who he voted for. What if he voted for Trump? I don't know. How many of those fraudulent votes, they didn't all go to Democrats. Some of them likely went to Republicans as well. And who knows? Some fraudulent votes may have went to the Libertarians, right? You know, like 0.1% of those. Anyway, let's see. I heard Trump is sleeping with an immigrant who is living in government-funded housing. Well, when you put it that way, I suppose. All right, folks, that's my show. It's very quick today. I just wanted to kind of walk through this and say, where do I stand on the SAVE Act? I think there are problems, and hopefully I presented a convincing argument for you to at least be skeptical of the SAVE Act if Congress, and Congress is not going to, but if Congress were to revise that, or if somebody were to come out and say, here is where the evidence of voter fraud would completely outweigh any possibility of voter disenfranchisement, then I might be more willing to support it. I would also be more willing to support it if somebody makes a strong constitutional argument. That's probably going to be equally difficult as would be satisfying the other requirements that I have. But anyway, that's my show for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. Please come back later. Drop a comment in the comments, help out the algorithm and whatnot. Help this show grow, even though today was maybe not the best example of the show. But I will be back tomorrow, and we'll do this show right. Okay? We'll be on time, and I'll be a little bit more focused. But anyway, until then, you know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and buy me a coffee, because every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, The Message of Liberty, will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in and look forward to seeing you in the next episode.